Hello and welcome to the stream. Um, I hope you enjoy it. And we playing Dagon. Um, it's a story-like game that was inspired by H.P. Lovecraft. It's very loud. Okay, let's start. Dagon is a faithful, interactive adaptation of H.P. Lovecraft's work, focused on story and atmosphere. You will not find difficult choices, actions, sequences, or inventory management here, and movement is limited to progression through locations along with the plot.
I am writing this under an appreciable mental strain, since by tonight I shall be no more.
During the game, you will encounter interactive elements. Some of them will allow you to continue your journey, others reveal interesting facts about the original short story, its historical background, and the author. Some of the trivia is hidden. In order to find these secrets, focus your eyes and look in for the Elder sign. As to letters, my case is particular. I write such things exactly as easily and as rapidly as I would utter the same topic in conversation. Indeed, expression is with me largely replacing conversation, as my condition of nervous perspiration becomes more and more acute. I cannot bear to talk much now, and becoming as silent as the spectator himself, my locality extends on the paper. H.P. Lovecraft to Reinhard Kindler, December 23rd, 1917. Throughout his life, Lovecraft penned around 100,000 letters to his friends and fans, out of which were about 10 survive to this day. But his tendencies to endless correspondence with a relatively late growth. In youth, I scrawled did any letter writing, thanking anyone for a present was so much of an ordeal that I would rather have written a 250-line or 25-page treatise on the rings of Saturn. Collected letters 1929 through 1931, H.P. Lovecraft. Lovecraft would often skip meals to afford postage. Collections of his correspondence have been published in various books, and selected letters can be found online. Some readers consider them his most important legacy. Oh, also I'm wearing a Pikachu onesie, so I'm very cozy and comfy. I have a nice cup of tea with me. I hope you all sit down, relax, and enjoy this game, because it's mostly just reading and listening.
Penniless, and at the end of my supply of the drug which alone makes life endurable, I can bear the torture no longer, and shall cast myself from this garret window into the squalid street below.
Oh, my
Do
tea
not
tastes
think from my
minty, that's
slavery
odd.
to morphine that I am a weakling or a degenerate. When you have read these hastily scrawled pages, you may guess, though never fully realize, why it is that I must have forgetfulness or death.
Morphine entered into use in the 19th century and was routinely administered to treat severe pain during the American Civil War and World War I. It was also sold without restrictions until 1914. Morphine became more popular after the invention of hypodermic syringe around 1854. Prudence, I can't pronounce that name, who first isolated the substance, originally named it morphium after Morpheus, the Greek god associated with dreams. At the time when Dagon was published, morphine abuse, known as soldier's disease, already posed a big problem in the United States.
It was in one of the most open and least frequented parts of the broad Pacific that the packet of which I was supercargo fell a victim to the German sea raider.
Ooh, what's this? Dagon was written around a month after the United States entered World War I. Lovecraft was actively interested in its course. He composed many poems in which he gave encouragement to soldiers and commented on the events unfolding in Europe. He tried to enlist in the army, which his mentions in one of the letters to Reinhard Kindler. Some time ago, impressed by my entire uselessness in the world, I resolved to attempt enlistment. Despite my almost invalid condition, I argued that if I chose a regiment soon to depart for France, my sheer nervous force, which is not inconsiderable, might sustain me till a bullet or pierce of shrapnel could more conceivably and effectively dispose of me. That is to Reinhard Kindler, H.P. Lovecraft. But even though he passed through the physical exam, his mother prevented him from going to the war. She has threatened to go to any lengths, legal or otherwise, if I do not reveal all the ills which unfit me for the army. I am Providence, the life and times of H.P. Lovecraft, Saint Jose, or Sergeant Josie. I don't really know.
The Great War was then at its very beginning, and the ocean forces of the Hun had not completely sunk to their later degradation. So that our vessel was made a legitimate prize, whilst we of her crew were treated with all the fairness and consideration due us as naval prisoners.
The Huns were Central Asian nomads who established a dominion in Europe and invaded the Roman Empire in the 5th century AD. They were known as brutal, deadly warriors and masters of quick raids who were also developed powerful composite bows, lassos, and early siege weapons. During World War I, the British used the word Huns as a synonym for Germans in order to emphasize their brutality. However, the term originated with the German Emperor William II gave a speech to his troops on July, 27th July 1900 before they embarked to China. Should you encounter the enemy, he will not be defeated. No quarter will be given. No prisoners will not be taken. Whoever falls into your hands is forfeited. As 1,000 years ago, the Huns, under their king Aleta, made a name for themselves, one that even today makes them seem mighty in history and a legend. May the name German be affirmed by you in such a way in China that no Chinese will ever again dare to look cross-eyed at a German. The refusal to take prisoners was a clear breach of laws and customs of war adopted during the First Harbor Convention in 1899. Interesting facts about Canada. They had a world in World War One. They had a take no prisoners policy and were regarded very highly as extremely powerful and fear-inspiring group, as they were often well trained in their take no prisoners policy. They were avid believers of vengeance and struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. A far cry from how Canada is viewed nowadays.
So liberal, indeed, was the discipline of our captors that 5 days after we were taken, I managed to escape alone in a small boat with water and provisions for a good length of time. When I finally found myself adrift and free, I had but little idea of my surroundings. Never a competent navigator, I could only guess vaguely by the sun and stars that I was somewhat south of the equator. Of the longitude, I knew nothing, and no island or coastline was in sight. The weather kept fair, and for uncounted days I drifted aimlessly beneath the scorching sun, waiting either for some passing ship or to be cast on the shores of some habitable land.
Oh. Dagon was written in July 1917 and the first published in 1919 in The Vagrant, an amateur magazine focused on the supernatural. The story is the first of his stories that introduce the element from the Cthulhu's mythos. Dagon itself, a pagan cult worshipping Dagon, later appears in the shadow over Innsmouth, one of Lovecraft's most popular works. In 1917 is also the year when he wrote The Tomb, a story about a daydreamer who discovers a mysterious mausoleum in the woods by his house and becomes obsessed with it. These two works marked Lovecraft's return to short story writing after he burned most of his attempts at the genre in years prior and decided to concentrate on poetry. Lovecraft stated that it was his friend William Paul Cook, a literary publisher and critic, who convinced him to start writing weird fiction again.
But neither ship nor land appeared, and I began to despair in my solitude upon the heaving vastness of unbroken blue. The change happened whilst I slept. Its details I shall never know, for my slumber, though troubled and dream-infested, was continuous.
Oh, that's squids. Hello, Mr. Squid. You are looking unwell. Any lore around here? No?
When at last I awoke, it was to discover myself half sucked into a slimy expanse of hellish black mire, which extended about me in monotonous undulations as far as I could see, and in which my boat lay grounded some distance away. Though one might well imagine that my first sensation would be of wonder at so prodigious and unexpected a transformation of scenery, I was in reality more horrified than astonished. For there was in the air and in the rotting soil a sinister quality which chilled me to the very core. The region was putrid with the carcasses of decaying fish and of other, less describable things which I saw protruding from the nasty mud of the unending plain. Perhaps I should not hope to convey in mere words the unutterable hideousness that can dwell in absolute silence and barren immensity.
Silence can be terrifying, and the truth is, that's probably some of the most terrifying things there is. An absolute nothingness. Because anything could be out there, and I guess it's just my thoughts, but the fact of nothing is terrifying. If you're just, if you're standing over a cliff, which is surrounded by a black nothing, your mind will start to race. Because in truth, the human mind is the most terrible and terrifying thing there ever could be. Because in the dark, it questions what it sees. It creates in its head what scares it most, and wonder if it lurks within the shadows. If you see a cliff leading into a black cave, you'll wonder what's in there. Your mind will race to the most terrible and awful things. And in the end, that's what scares you. Not the fact of the darkness, but what lurks underneath its veil.
There was nothing within hearing, and nothing in sight, save a vast reach of black slime. Yet the very completeness of the stillness and the homogeneity of the landscape oppressed me with a nauseating fear. The sun was blazing down from a sky which seemed to me almost black in its cloudless cruelty, as though reflecting the inky marsh beneath my feet.
Hmm. Anything around here?
As I crawled into the stranded boat, I realized that
Oh,
only
hello,
one
fish.
theory could explain my position.
What is that? It's like the landscape is breathing. Like the lungs expanding and contracting in a human body, pushing up at the thin skin and a rib cage covering it and protecting it.
Through some unprecedented volcanic upheaval, a portion of the ocean floor must have been thrown to the surface, exposing regions for which innumerable millions of years had lain hidden under unfathomable watery depths. So great was the extent of the new land which had risen beneath me that I could not detect the faintest noise of the surging ocean, straining my ears as I might. Nor were there any seafowl to prey upon the dead things.
How odd. An absolute nothing, like I said before, absolute nothing is terrifying. The mystery of volcanic islands. Volcanic eruptions sometimes result in the creation of islands. Most of them are transcend erode after some time, but some prove permanent. The floating pumice rose rock created when superheated, pressurized rock is ejected from a volcano can move across long distances and transport particles and I don't know that word that cling to it. In 2001, rafts of pumice created during the eruption of a volcano near Tonga, Polynesia, eventually reached Australia. The world is so interesting, and it's beautiful and terrifying.
For several hours I sat thinking or brooding in the boat, which lay upon its side and afforded a slight shade as the sun moved across the heavens. As the day progressed, the ground lost some of its stickiness and seemed likely to dry sufficiently for travelling purposes in a short time. That night I slept but little, and the next day I made for myself a pack containing food and water. preparatory to an overland journey in search of the vanished
Hello,
sea
tentacles.
and possible rescue.
Anything of note around here? Nope. Let's move on.
On the third morning, I found the soil dry enough to walk upon with ease. The odor of the fish was maddening, but I was too much concerned with graver things to mind so slight an evil, and set out boldly for an unknown goal.
It would be terrifying, but would also be really cool to me to explore a place like this. An infinite, vast desert of muck and death. Exploring lands no one ever has before. Something so deep in the earth suddenly shot straight up and exposed, like a wound hidden under scars. And
All day I forged steadily westward, guided by a faraway hummock which rose higher than any other elevation on the rolling desert.
oh no, not the whale.
That night I encamped, and on the following day still travelled toward the hummock, though that object seemed scarcely nearer than when I had first espied it.
Perception of locations is a very interesting thing. It can make you. It's very odd and interesting how you can change the perception of things just by changing its shape or the length and width, stretching it out and putting it at an angle. Horrors of the Ocean, the creator of the Cthulhu mythos and the fictional underwater city of Rila, was convinced that life could not exist at the bottom of the ocean because the water pressure would make it uninhabitable. Today we know that the darkest depths of the ocean are home to many particular organisms. The deepest dwelling fish we have discovered so far, the marina snailfish, can live about 8,000 meters, more than 26,000 feet below the ocean surface in never-ending darkness. At any hellishly crushing pressure, hundreds of times stronger than any of those found at sea level. Upon glancing at the modern photos of deep-sea creatures such as anglerfish and fangtooth or viperfish and their truly Lovecraftian characteristics, it's hard to not find some irony in this. Creatures of the dark can look incredibly beautifully luminescent and grand. Like, there are octopi which have glowing bits on them to trick predators into wondering which truly the eye is. And there are some horrifying things lurking in the depths, but beautiful ones too. Giant squids are very interesting, and it seems the further you go, the larger things get, and the more dangerous they get as well.
By the fourth evening, I attained the base of the mound, which turned out to be much higher than it had appeared from a distance. An intervening valley setting it out in sharper relief from the general surface. Too weary to ascend, I slept in the shadow of the hill. I know not why my dreams were so wild that night, but ere the waning and fantastically gibbous moon had risen far above the eastern plain, I was awake in a cold perspiration, determined to
Ooh,
sleep
that's
no
really
more.
nice looking.
Such visions as I had experienced were too much for me to endure again, and in the glow of the moon I saw how unwise I had been to travel by day. Without the glare of the parching sun, my journey would have cost me less energy. Indeed, I now felt quite able to perform the ascent which had deterred me at sunset. Picking up my pack, I started for the crest of the eminence.
The loner. Contrary to popular opinion, Lovecraft was not ever frowning or eccentric, grumpy loner. He considered himself to be a person who appreciated humor. Moreover, he would often meet with friends at his apartment or various cafes, Brooklyn and Manhattan. At times, his social life was so intense his work would suffer for months. There was a point when he finally decided he needed to put an end to daily meetings and loiterings in New York cafeterias and resorted to hiding at home, reading, with the main room light turned off, pretending he wasn't there whenever a friend knocked on his door. He also had another method of deterring his guests, which involved greeting them in a bathrobe, which with an unmade bed visible in the background and piles of paper scattered across the floor.
I have said that the unbroken monotony of the rolling plain was a source of vague horror to me. But I think my horror was greater when I gained the summit of the mound and looked down the other side into an immeasurable pit or canyon, whose black recesses the moon had not yet soared high enough to illumine. I felt myself on the edge of the world, peering over the rim into a fathomless chaos of eternal night. Through my terror ran curious reminiscences of Paradise Lost, and of Satan's hideous climb through the unfashioned realms of darkness. As the moon climbed higher in the sky, I began to see that the slopes of the valley were not quite so perpendicular as I had imagined.
This would be terrifying if I'm being honest, but also interesting. Because humans are naturally curious,
Ledges and
even if
outcroppings
it's
of rock
not
afforded fairly
good for
easy
us.
footholds for a descent.
Like, imagine if you looked down and saw nothing. A deep pit. Would you want to know what's on the bottom of it? It ends. And if you saw a way down, would you go there?
Whilst after a drop of only a few hundred feet, the declivity became very gradual. Urged on by an impulse which I cannot definitely analyze, I scrambled with difficulty down the rocks and stood on the gentler slope beneath, gazing into the Stygian deeps, where no light had yet penetrated. All at once, my attention was captured by a vast and singular object on the opposite slope, which rose steeply about 100 yards ahead of me.
If I'm being honest, I would really like a voice like the narrator here.
An object that gleamed whitely in the newly bestowed rays of the ascending moon.
What if there was stuff like this at the bottom of the ocean and we didn't know?
That it was merely a gigantic piece of stone, I soon assured myself.
What if there was something before and just underneath the ocean? If there was, I doubt we would ever know in our lifetime. Because the ocean is so massive and large and vast that I doubt we'll ever explore all of it. At least in our lifetime.
But I was conscious of a distinct impression that its contour and position were not altogether the work of nature.
Absolutely, it's almost a perfect rectangle.
A closer scrutiny filled me with sensations I cannot express. For despite its enormous magnitude and its position in an abyss which had yawned at the bottom of the sea since the world was young, I perceived beyond a doubt that the strange object was a well-shaped monolith, whose massive bulk had known the workmanship and perhaps the worship of living and thinking creatures. Dazed and frightened, yet not without a certain thrill of the scientist's or archaeologist's delight. I examined my surroundings more closely.
Like, no matter who you are, no matter how much you say that you would just turn around and run away, the truth is, I think you, me, and everyone, no matter how scared or alone we are, would walk towards it. Because it's a rectangle, it's very human and livable. It's proof that something was there, and it's comforting in a sense, knowing that another being was there and at least made it.
The moon, now near the zenith, shone weirdly and vividly above the towering steeps that hemmed in the chasm, and revealed the fact that a far-flung body of water flowed at the bottom, winding out of sight in both directions and almost lapping my feet as I stood on the slope. Across the chasm, the wavelets washed the base of the Cyclopean monolith, on whose surface I could now trace both inscriptions and crude sculptures. The writing was in a system of hieroglyphics unknown to me and unlike anything I'd ever seen in books.
Sorry, I'm just getting a drink.
Consisting for the most part of conventionalized aquatic symbols such as fishes, eels, octopi, crustaceans, mollusks, whales, and the like. Several characters obviously represented marine things which are unknown to the modern world.
The thing on the far right does seem familiar. I thought I've seen it somewhere. Like, it's black and white and spiny, kind of like a zebra, striped. That one could be a giant squid. I'm talking about that one in the far.
But whose decomposing forms I had observed on the ocean-risen plain. It was the pictorial carving, however, that did most to hold me spellbound. Plainly visible
Oh no,
across
there
the
was a thing
intervening
up there.
water, on account of their enormous size, were an array of bas-reliefs whose subjects would have excited the envy of a Doré. I think that these things were supposed to depict men, at least a certain sort of men, though the creatures were shown disporting like fishes in the waters of some marine grotto, or paying homage at some monolithic shrine which appeared to be under the waves as well. Of their faces and forms I dare not speak in detail, for the mere remembrance makes me grow faint. Grotesque beyond the imagination of a Poe or a Bulwer. They were damnably human in general outline, despite webbed hands and feet, shockingly wide and flabby lips, glassy, bulging eyes, and other features less pleasant to recall. Curiously enough, they seem to have been chiseled badly out of proportion with their scenic background. For one of the creatures was shown in the act of killing a whale, represented as but little larger than himself. I remarked, as I say, their grotesqueness and strange size, but in a moment decided that they were merely the imaginary gods of some primitive fishing or seafaring tribe. Some tribe whose last descendant had perished eras before the first ancestor of the Piltdown or Neanderthal man was born.
The Piltdown Man. Lovecraft would often use the latest scientific discoveries as inspiration for his work. He would even update his stories at the last moment in order to make sure they reflected the latest breakthroughs. Unfortunately, this method was not without its flaws. After Lovecraft's death, the Piltdown Man discovery mentioned in Dagon turned out to be a fraud. In 1912, Charles Darson, an amateur anthropologist, announced that he discovered the missing link between ape and man. The fossilized remains of previously unknown early humans. Years later, they turned out to be a forgery, but by that point, the fraud had already managed to negatively affect the early research on human evolution. In the years when the discovery took place, the majority of the scientific community believed that Dawson indeed found the missing link. In 1953, Time magazine published evidence proving that Dawson was a con man. It turned out that the fossil of previously unknown early humans consisted of a human skull, the jaw of an orangutan, and chimpanzee teeth.
Awestruck at this unexpected glimpse into a past beyond the conception of the most daring anthropologist.
Anthropology is important. I might be an anthropologist or go into studies about anthropology, or maybe religious studies.
I stood musing whilst the moon cast queer reflections on the silent channel before me. Then, suddenly, I saw it. With only a slight churning to mark its rise to the surface, the thing slid into view above the dark waters.
I didn't see it. Oh jeez.
Fiend-like and loathsome, it darted like a stupendous monster of nightmares to the monolith, about which it flung its gigantic scaly arms, the while it bowed its hideous head and gave vent to certain measured sounds. I think I went mad then. Of my frantic ascent of the slope and cliff, and of my delirious journey back to the stranded boat, I remember little. I believe I sang a great deal and laughed oddly when I was unable to sing.
The green moon.
I have indistinct recollections of a great storm sometime after I reached the boat.
The human mind is a beautiful, great, and maddening thing. It's so interesting and complex.
At any rate, I know that I heard pearls of thunder and other tones which nature utters only in her wildest moods.
For causing someone to laugh and produce things of happiness when in fearful situations is your reaction, and very animalistic.
When I came out of the shadows, I was in a San Francisco hospital. Brought thither by the captain of the American ship which had picked up my boat in mid-ocean. In my delirium, I had said much, but found that my words had been given scant attention. Of any land upheaval in the Pacific, my rescuers knew nothing, nor did I deem it necessary to insist upon a thing which I knew they could not believe.
Would you believe someone if this happened to them? It'd be frighteningly impossible, but would you truly believe them? The atheist. Lovecraft considered himself an atheist and absolute materialist, which he attributed to partly to his early childhood interests in astronomy and science in general. In his own words, I am indeed an absolute materialist so far as actual belief goes, with not a shred of credence in any form of supernaturalism, religion, spiritualism, transcendentalism, metaphysicalism, and immortality. All I say is that I think it is damned likely that anything like a central cosmic will or spirit world or internal survival of persistent personality existence. They are the most irritable and unjustified of all the guesses can be made about the universe, and I am not enough of a hair splitter to pretend that I don't regard them as arrogant and neglectable moonshine. In theory, I am an agnostic, but pretending the appearance of a radical evidence, I must be classed. Practically, I am provisionally as an atheist. I don't know if I believe in a god. I believe there could be something out there, but that's what I said earlier, where our minds go to its scariest and oddest places when confronted with the unknown, and what's more unknown than death. Lovecraft was a prominent figure in the world of amateur journalism. In 1915, he started publishing his own journal called Conservation, which included political and social commentary, poetry, short stories, and literary criticism written by him and other authors. Howard was a skilled wordsmith, but he also took criticism to heart, which resulted in his decisions to step away from writing poetry and concentrate on weird fiction again for the first time since his teenage years. Dagon, published in 1919, is one of the short stories written during that period. In this excerpt from Unsurfaced, the master of horror fiction explains his attitude towards warfare and the idea of world peace. Why any sane human being can believe in the possibility of universal peace is more than conservation can fathom. It should the entire civilized world agree simultaneously to disarm one or more nations would undoubtedly restrain secret armaments and at proper time would take advantage of their more altruistic and less attitude operations in a wild career of consent against unarmed victims. No country is or ever can be above warfare until the basic impulses of human and animals shall miraculously be changed. I do agree with that, as much as I hope there would be world peace. It is extremely unlikely. Humans are oftentimes greedy, and there's nothing we can change about that. No matter how much we say we won't want it, deep down, if we could have it, chances are we would want to take it. But there are exceptions to that, as Buddhism and stuff like that. But it's a lot harder than people think. World peace is almost impossible.
Once I sought out a celebrated ethnologist and amused him with peculiar questions regarding the ancient Philistine legend of Dagon, the fish god.
Dagon was the main deity of Philistines, worshipped throughout the Middle East as the ancient god of fertility and crops. In Hebrew, the word Dagon was a common noun for grain. The rulers of Akkad chose him as the patron saint of their war conquests. He also appeared as the judge of the dead in the Australian poem as an underworld prison warder in one of the Babylonian texts. He is often mistakenly taken for a fish god due to wrong interpretations of his name, as in Hebrew, the word Dag means fish. In H.P. Lovecraft's work, Dagon is an underwater deity ruling over the deep ones, a human race with fish traits that reside in the ocean. He is worshipped by a secret cult called the Socratic Order of Dagon. Mm. Grab a drink.
But but soon perceiving that he was
I'm out of
hopelessly
tea.
conventional, I did not press my inquiries.
I'm out of tea now. August Derleth was an American writer and an agnostic. He also befriended Lovecraft and published many of his works through his company, Arkham House. Although he greatly contributed to the popularism of the author's works, after his death he is surrounded by numerous controversies. One of his most questionable decisions involving introducing one of the good versus evil doctrines. Derleth was a devout Catholic to the Cthulhu mythos, which contrasted with Lovecraft's view of the world and his approach to cosmic horror. As a result, the author's works were often misunderstood and misrepresented in today's culture. It is also worth noting that Lovecraft was never very interested in creating a mythology and used the term Cthulhu mythos. Was coined after by Derleth after the author left the mortal plane. Lovecraft's attempt to find a job in 1925 were influenced by advice he received from friends. Among others, he started freelancing for a marketing magazine where he would write announcements and commercials. Feel free to judge his copywriting skills for yourself. From an ad from Curtis Warlock. Curtis Warlock embraces both the usual structural units and cleverest uses of a built-in or permanent furniture, such as a bookcase, dresser, buffets, cupboards. Every model is convinced and created purest art, ripest scholarship, and mellowest craftsmanship, which an energetic enterprise can command, and made to conform rigid to the architecture of each particular type of home and cost. Concentrating on the quality is amazingly low, and a trademark on the individual pieces prevents any substitution by careless contractors. Around here, oh, these days the word scientist is a widely accepted term, but at the time Dagon was published, it was a subject to a wide debate. After the author used it in his story, critics pointed out that man of science was a more appropriate term to employ. He admitted in defense of Dagon that if Dagon were to be reprinted, he would indeed use the phrase they suggested. Scientist was coined as an analog to artist, to be used when referencing to those study different branches of science. Yet, in the 19th and early 20th century, scientific researchers in Great Britain and the United States were of the opinion that man of science, resembling the term man of letters, is the only proper choice. Among the other things, it was a gender specific, indicating that science was an endeavor to be pursued by only one sex. The term scientist became more accepted after World War II, and man of science started fading into obscurity as an old-fashioned synonym. Sorry, I kept saying cinnamon.
It is at night, especially when the moon is gibbous and waning, that I see the thing. I tried morphine, but the drug has given only transient surcease and has drawn me into its clutches as a hopeless slave. So now, I am to end it all, having written a full account for the information or the contemptuous amusement of my fellow men.
Oh, what's this? Lovecraft on tobacco and alcohol. Lovecraft hated tobacco, even though he used to smoke when he was 12 in order to look and feel like an adult. In his correspondence with his friends Ranald Kindler, he claims that he quit as soon as he started wearing long pants. He also had a very strong opinion about alcohol, as evidenced by his letter to Zena Brown, dated 13th February 1928. As for the matters of drinking, I have never tasted intoxicating liquor and never intend to. Having a strong atheistic disgust at anything which blunts or corrodes the delicate nature equiposed of the evolved human intellect and imagination. Drinking excites my personality, a repugnance, hence I don't drink. Let the herd do what they will. I am rather in favor of prohibition. The prohibition of any one antisocial force, as well as any of, and as of any other.
Often, I ask myself if it could not all have been a pure phantasm, a mere freak of fever, as I lay sun-stricken and raving in the open boat after my escape from the German man-of-war. This I ask myself, but ever does there come before me a hideously vivid vision in reply. I cannot think of the deep sea without shuddering at the nameless things that may at this very moment be crawling and floundering on its slimy bed, worshipping their ancient stone idols and carving their own detestable likenesses on submarine obelisks of water-soaked granite. I dream of a day when they may rise above the billows to drag down into their reeking talons the remnants of puny, war-exhausted mankind. Of a day when the land shall sink and the dark ocean shall ascend amidst universal pandemonium. The end is near. I hear a noise at the door, as of some immense slippery body lumbering against it. It shall not find me. God, that hand! The window! The window!
That was it for Dagon, at least the Dagons that I have. I hope you enjoyed, and I know the stream was a little later. I hope you really